As you probably know, one of the most amazing pictures to come out in the past few years is E.T., and this young lady has earned a great deal of attention from her appearance in it.
What happens when the smoothest talk show host in TV history gets pushed to his limits, live on air? Johnny Carson was known for his cool wit and effortless charm, but not every guest played by his rules. From tense silences to full-blown confrontations, these unforgettable moments reveal the rare times the king of late night lost control. Why did one guest storm off? Why did Carson never speak to another again?
Johnny Carson was the biggest star in America. Movie stars, rock stars, I don't think anybody was bigger than Johnny because he was on night after night after night.
Johnny Carson was the undisputed monarch of late-night TV for more than 30 years. He had an uncanny knack for steering every interview, no matter how tense, into territory that was engaging, poised, and funny. But even he, the epitome of composure, could find himself off balance when certain guests came along. One name that notably rattled Carson wasn't a comedian or provocateur, it was Frank Sinatra, the guy known as Old Blue Eyes, a figure whose sheer presence shifted the power dynamics in the studio. They say that in the world of Sinatra, he didn't make an entrance, he made a statement. And on the Tonight Show stage, Carson sometimes felt that statement hit a little too hard. Frank Sinatra first appeared on Johnny's show in November 1976. The audience loved it. Sinatra sashayed on stage, draped one arm around Carson's shoulders and let the applause swell. After around 40 seconds, Carson grinned and quipped, "Do you need the whole show, Frank?" Sinatra replied like a pro, "Only till the band packs up." It was a magical moment for viewers and a jolt for the host. On camera, it looked spontaneous, but behind the scenes, as Carson's aides later told biographers, tension was palpable. Sinatra's team had arrived early, taken over temperature controls, added extra teleprompters, and staked out seats for a dozen friends. Security even logged Sinatra's entrance with unusually precise detail, as though a head of state had arrived. Carson wasn't a control freak, but he valued order, and Sinatra personified disruption. Carson's associates noticed a shift in his demeanor on Sinatra nights. He'd quietly pour an extra scotch before going on air, murmuring, "Chairman of the board, sure, but I still sign the checks." He knew the upside. Sinatra brought ratings, prestige, and that magnetic allure. But he also knew the cost. The monologue was his domain. Sinatra had muscled his way into it. At the same time, Johnny never lost his professionalism. On screen, he introduced Sinatra sincerely, steering clear of gossip or controversy. The host focused on nostalgia, the Rat Pack, classic performances, and Sinatra played along, expertly dodging political or personal flashpoints. The result? Ratings soared. The off-camera story? Carson's blood pressure spiked. Fred de Cordova, Carson's longtime producer, later acknowledged the delicate balancing act. They gained buzz and goodwill, but Carson paid for it emotionally. Sinatra's aura wasn't something you argued with. It was something you absorbed. One evening in 1976, during the monologue, Carson began a joke about a peanut allergy. Sinatra suddenly appeared on stage, arm casually slung over Johnny. It was a breathtaking sight, and the applause was deafening. The moment lasted nearly a minute. Carson, starstruck on national television, paused mid-bit, blinking, but then he recovered, cracked a dry line, and they carried on. That night wasn't a stumble. It was a masterclass in live recovery. What viewers saw was effortless grace. What Carson felt was disquieting loss of control. Sinatra hadn't just shared the spotlight, he'd almost stolen it. The subtler moments, backstage, told the rest. When a junior producer mispronounced a name, Sinatra's bodyguard reportedly escorted them out. When lighting cues were off, Frank let the crew know, quietly, yet unmistakably. Carson, who thrived on balance and smooth rhythm, had to find new ways to keep the show on track. Still, he never refused Sinatra. Even as Sinatra made demands, Carson kept smiling. He directed interviews away from contentious topics, politics, rumor, messy romances, and anchored the show in stories rich with entertainment nostalgia. Ratings confirmed the logic. Frank Sinatra delivered. But the trade-off was apparent. Carson remained polite, collected, even deferential, yet close associates say he felt like the understudy in his own theatre. Legend has it that Carson once muttered, "He's got the gravity of a planet," while looking at Sinatra backstage. He recognized Sinatra's power, both magnetic and disruptive, and dealt with it the only way he knew, by keeping the show running, by making the guests look good, and by swallowing the unease. That's the paradox of late-night TV at its peak. Carson was masterful, but even the master could lose his footing when a legend arrives, with his own rules. Sinatra wasn't there to fit in. He was there to shift the narrative. Carson knew that. He didn't resist it. Instead, he absorbed it, tamed it, and kept smiling through it all. Chevy Chase burst onto the comedy scene in the mid-1000s, 970s, becoming one of Saturday Night Live's breakout talents. His dry wit, deadpan delivery, and swagger quickly made him a household name. In public, his sarcasm felt sharp but entertaining. On TV, those same traits translated into an edgy performance style that didn't always translate well to Carson's world of banter and balance. When Carson first booked Chevy, viewers were excited. After all, the host frequently showcased top-tier comic talent. Yet from the moment Chevy sat down across from Johnny, it was clear that something wasn't quite right. Chevy's humor was different. Not playful, but taut. Not warm, but caustic. His lines were cutting. The atmosphere grew colder, the laughs more guarded. Where Carson was known for putting guests at ease, making gentle jabs and finding a comfortable rhythm, Chevy's presence shifted the energy. Insiders from NBC later said the dynamic felt off. The set felt more like a debate stage than a conversation. Chevy seemed to eye Carson as much as he addressed him, an unspoken question as to who was truly in control. Carson, who seldom appeared rattled, sometimes hesitated. A line would land more like a challenge than a joke. The usual behind-the-couch chemistry evaporated. It wasn't lost on Carson that Chevy Chase had arrived, riding high on acclaim and ambition. The industry was buzzing. Could he be the future of late night? Could this former SNL star master the same gamesmanship that Carson had refined over decades? The implications were unmistakable. Chevy's swagger hinted at competition rather than collaboration. Of course, Carson was no stranger to confidence or ambition. His show thrived on smart, spirited dialogue. But Chevy's presence felt different. It wasn't just confidence, it was challenge. Not every line was delivered politely. Some carried a sting. The distinction mattered to Carson, whose interviews were built on mutual respect and a subtle give and take. With Chevy, that dynamic felt less reciprocal. Oh, what happened on camera? Chevy moved conversationally, leaned in, arch eyebrows raised, delivering his lines almost as if daring Carson to respond in kind. Audiences at home felt the tension brew. What should have been friendly banter became sharper edges under studio lights. Laughter followed Chevy's lines. Not always perfectly timed, not always comfortable. Sometimes the atmosphere seemed stiff, and though Carson stayed professional, insiders admitted he didn't appear relaxed. Backstage, it was said that Carson and Chevy barely exchanged pleasantries once the cameras stopped rolling. Their personal interaction, or lack of it, only deepened the awkwardness. Carson's team described Chevy as a rising star who carried himself like he was already the boss. No personal warmth, no sense of partnership. It raised questions. Was this a comic collaboration or rivalry disguised as banter? In many ways, Chevy Chase represented the new generation of comedy. Sharp, assertive, willing to dominate the moment, not simply complement it. Carson, on the other hand, had built his career on letting guests shine while he guided the flow with measured wit. Chevy brought something else, a forward energy, a drive to be the center of attention. In the mirror of late-night tradition, It looked like unsettled ground. What was the result? Tape footage from the NBC archives shows Carson at times returning Chevy's quips with polite applause rather than laughter. Rarely did he come back with his usual quick, sharp retort. The match of wit became asymmetrical. Chevy would deliver a blow, Carson would smile, deflect, move on. That pattern frustrated some producers, who felt the host was being overshadowed by his guest rather than engaging in spirited dialogue. Still, Carson did his job. He held the segment, made sure the audience stayed engaged, and he did a fine job of letting Chevy's star shine. But his studio staff sensed that he was carefully rehearsing the exits, was watching the clock more closely. In a world televised live, behind every expertly delivered line is a host maintaining composure amid shifting dynamics. With Chevy, that balancing act became visible. Some wondered if Chevy saw The Tonight Show as a platform, a stepping stone for bigger ambitions. The actor went on to film major movies like Caddyshack and National Lampoon's Vacation. Maybe he did view the set as his territory. Carson, who had built his identity on late-night hosting, likely bristled at any hint of displacement. Carson never publicly spoke ill of Chevy. In fact, they remained courteous. But insiders around the set say Carson's smiles, a touch more reserved, a beat slower, revealed subtle unease. He respected Chevy's talent, but he didn't warm to the competitive edge. What's interesting in retrospect is how the network responded. NBC monitored audience reactions closely. The episodes with Chevy didn't tank, but they didn't shine either. Ratings were steady, applause meters lower than average. Feedback suggested viewers felt less of the warmth and more of the tension. Behind the scenes, producers flagged it as good television, less good comfort. In the end, Carson continued to invite Chevy occasionally because he could not ignore the buzz. But he kept these encounters brief, moved swiftly into lighter segments afterwards. Musical guests, comedy bits, something to diffuse the coolness. If Chevy's presence tested the waters, Carson quietly built buffers to protect the tone. It's worth reflecting on the contrast between Carson's and Chevy's comedic approaches. Carson valued alchemy, the way laughter could build intimacy, surprise, even healing. Chevy's style was more clinical, perfectly calibrated, socially sharp, sometimes provocative. Both forms of humor have their place, but they didn't mesh easily on The Tonight Show's stage. In a nutshell, Chevy Chase disrupted Johnny Carson's rhythm, not with scandal or silence, but with style. And that style, bold and pointed, forced Carson to step carefully. Yet he never lost footing on stage. He never got crushed. He simply adapted, played the host, made sure the audience saw a clever guest, a smiling host, a show that rolled on. That adaptability is central to understanding Carson's mastery. He wasn't always comfortable, but he maintained equilibrium. Did he enjoy the on-air chemistry? Maybe not. Did he win out at the end? Still standing he remained. And in those moments, we see his professionalism shine brightest. Fred Rogers wasn't a bombastic comic or a celebrity star. He embodied warmth, sincerity, and deliberate calm. His shows taught children about empathy, imagination, honesty, and he brought that same genteel presence to Carson's set. He walked on stage with an easy "Thank you very much, friends. I'm very glad to be here." The studio audience clapped politely, uncertain how to respond, and that moment of stillness stretched. On a show designed for comedy timing, every second counted. Johnny attempted to lighten the mood. He kicked off with a joke, lifting his foot to reveal a pair of white sneakers and saying, "Fred, I wore these in your honor." Rogers replied serenely, "That's very thoughtful, Johnny. Sneakers can help us feel ready to play." But unlike most guests, Rogers wasn't playing along with the comedy game. He didn't deliver jokes. He spoke gentle truths. When Carson leaned into ordinary fan mail or goofy childhood tales, Rogers stayed true to his message, recounting stories of a child afraid of a bathtub drain. and the power of imagination to soothe fear. The entire segment felt less like a comedy set and more like a calm therapy session. Behind the scenes, the mood shifted dramatically. Producers hurried to rearrange camera angles, writers crossed out jokes, and directors prepped musical acts to jump in. NBC crews had long mastered the art of pacing, but this encounter threw their plans off kilter. Nielsen ratings reportedly dipped during Rogers' segment. Laugh meters clicked at less than half their usual count. Stillness filled the studio. Despite the awkwardness, the reaction in the mailroom was something unexpected. Hundreds of heartfelt letters arrived. Parents thanked The Tonight Show for allowing Rogers a platform among late-night viewers. Many writers and producers admitted it brought goodwill they hadn't anticipated. As Fred de Cordova, Carson's producer, noted, it was a trade-offless comedic momentum, but a lasting emotional ripple. Next time Rogers appeared, the show was better prepared. He was slotted during the nostalgic holiday season, when audiences were softer. Carson's monologue was trimmed to make room. Producers encouraged Rogers to bring familiar props, his little trolley or a puppet, to help the host riff. Musical acts were kept nearby, ready in case the tone needed shifting. Carson remained deferential, offering handshakes and sincere thanks, but backstage he would sometimes mutter about pacing. Book him after a stand-up next time. Daddy needs caffeine after that. On social platforms like Reddit, decades later, viewers noted the unique energy. JC handled that interview really well, especially with the audience laughing. MR had more game than JC. Those comments highlight a truth. Carson's professionalism shone through, even when the evening veered off course. He managed to honor Rogers without undermining the structural integrity of his own show. Several years later, Carson admitted privately that Rogers had been the hardest guest to interview. Not due to conflict, but because of grace. Rogers disrupted his rhythm in such a profound way that, as Carson said, I kept checking the clock and my pulse at the same time. This might seem ironic. Rogers was neither arrogant nor disruptive. He did not insult nor overshadow. He offered kindness, and yet, kindness was exactly what disrupted the show. It reminded everyone that viewers weren't only there for laughs, they were also there for connection. Comedy moved the crowd, sincerity touched the heart. Perhaps this was exactly the balance Carson was trying to maintain throughout his career. The Tonight Show staged laughter, but it thrived on authenticity, even when the pace slowed. Rogers' segment became a lesson in subtlety. It showed that television could pause and breathe, that sincerity could hold an audience just as firmly as laughter. The ripple effects lasted beyond one show. Producers learned to anticipate when the tone would dip and prepared counterweights, whether musical acts, brisk comedy bits, or additional scripting for Carson. And Rogers, always the thoughtful guest, never complained. Instead, he accepted requests graciously, never imposing. Rogers returned several times, each appearance smoother than the last. The second round featured more props, a softer tone, and a tardy but improved pace. And while it never became a lightning bolt of laughs, it did reinforce a broader truth. Carson's show wasn't only about jokes, it was also a mirror to the times. And sometimes, the times required just a touch more humanity. The Tonight Show's archives show that Rogers remained a rare kind of guest. A challenge, yes, but also a gift. He forced the host, writers, and crew to adapt. He reminded them that laughter came in different forms and that the audience sometimes preferred a pause to a punchline. Johnny Carson's Tonight Show thrived on spontaneity, lively back and forth, and the quicksilver energy of unfiltered humor. But occasionally, a guest appeared who disrupted that dynamic, not with aggression or drama, but by bringing a style that clashed starkly with his own. In this fourth and final part, we explore the last four guests who rattled Carson in ways that reveal not only their personalities, but also the delicate craft of his hosting genius. First, Bob Hope, a legend long before Carson arrived on The Tonight Show stage. Hope had almost single-handedly defined entertainment for mid-century America. By the 1970, as he was already a stalwart, a man of countless specials, radio broadcasts, and USO tours. When he appeared on Carson's program, he brought a full arsenal, a well-rehearsed act, lines cued days in advance, tight scripts, and sponsor-friendly segments. Carson, by contrast, thrived on unscripted humor. He painted clever punchlines on the fly and savored the spark between himself and his guest. Hope's methodical approach gutted that spontaneity. His team would arrive with thick folders containing pre-approved jokes, prompts, and camera cues that dictated the pace. He didn't joke off the cuff. He delivered memorized lines. Carson tried to respond with curiosity, but there was no space for improvisation, no room for the host to weave his own threads. On-air chemistry became muted. The audience laughed, but the spark felt set-piece, not organic. Jane's strings of pre-arranged banter had replaced the improvisational dance Carson valued. During one 1978 visit, Hope mentioned his long-term sponsor Texaco no fewer than 3 times in 10 minutes. Carson cracked. "Texaco gets more airtime than I do," prompting a polite laugh. And signaling a deeper frustration. Crew members later overheard him muttering about feeling like the warm-up act for a corporate ad. Carson didn't challenge Hope in public. He respected his stature, even admired it. But off-camera, their interactions were polite, yet perfunctory. When executives insisted Hope remain a regular, Carson negotiated buffer segments, musical performances or rising comedians booked immediately afterward to revive the momentum. Still, backstage tension was palpable. When Hope arrived, Carson's dressing room temperature reportedly dropped. Hope's visits became a balancing act. The Tonight Show thrived on unscripted brilliance and personal connection, but Hope's appearances leaned heavily into product and sponsorship. Carson tolerated it because it drove ratings from older demographics and brought in advertising clout. As always, he held his own, curated the exchange, smiled professionally, but his pause, his tone, betrayed the constraints he felt. That pattern leads us to Charlton Heston. Known for playing epic figures on screen, Moses, Michelangelo, and for a public persona rooted in grandeur and seriousness, Heston's visits on the show felt more like lectures than conversations. Carson tried to steer a light-hearted question, one that might elicit a chuckle, but instead Heston would begin a sweeping reflection on art, character, or history. The audience fidgeted. The band waited. Heston's deep voice and weighty presence filled the studio, but didn't uplift. His responses were long-winded, paced like a courtroom declaration. He was earnest and sincere, but he assaulted the show's rhythm. Laughter counts dipped dramatically. One recording showed only 9 laughs, while Carson's average was 30. Grabbed by gravity, the studio air felt heavy. Carson knew what to do. In follow-up shows, Heston's time was cut sharply. 8 minutes, no more, no tangents. Producers prepared comedy bombs ready to drop as soon as Heston sat down. Politically pointed jokes were edited out. Carson deferred, kept his tone respectful but succinct. No confrontation, only graceful management. The show had to regain its tempo after each heavy segment, so producers slotted riotous acts like Don Rickles or flashy storytelling immediately afterward. Even personality differences played a role. In the late 1000s 980s, Heston's vocal support for the NRA and his conservative stance added another layer. Carson aimed for non-partisan humor, poking fun at politics but never at people's core convictions. It was easier to sidestep confrontation. If Heston bristled, Carson erased the moment, channeled the segment to neutral territory, and moved on. The result, a professionally cordial interaction that never quite fit the Tonight Show blueprint. Next comes Wayne Newton. Known as Mr. Las Vegas, his persona was flamboyant, his singing career tied to showbiz royalty and Sin City splendor. Carson once poked fun at his thick hair or his Vegas image, casual jabs, typical of late-night monologues. Viewers found them funny. Behind the scenes, Newton seethed. He wasn't just a name on stage. He was a businessman with millions invested, a man who could fight fire with financing. One day in 1980, Newton came to the NBC lot wearing a silk shirt and a controlled glare. He marched to Carson's office, stormed in and confronted him. "You ever call me a joke again, I'll show you the punchline." And then he left. Carson, caught off guard, sat in silence for nearly a minute before murmuring, "Well, damn." Television legend. Writers quietly erased all Newton jokes from future shows. The dynamic changed from that point forward. Newton returned, but only under strict conditions. No pre-show jabs, no backstage references, polished questions only. On screen, it felt polite but flat. Carson's usual mischievous charm was subdued. He wasn't comfortable risking another confrontation. Observers felt the tension in silent pauses and firmer responses. It wasn't softness, it was control. The moment carved a boundary, and Carson respected it. This sets the scene for our final guest. Number 1, Joan Rivers. She might have seemed like the embodiment of Carson's world, sharp, witty, fearless on the mic, but her ambition triggered one of the most dramatic fissures in late-night history. Rivers first appeared on Carson's show in 1965. Her brand of self-deprecating, sharp-edged comedy impressed Carson. They visited dozens of times together. Eventually, Rivers became his regular guest host, the first and only woman Carson entrusted with The Tonight Show. That trust began to fray. In 1986, Fox offered Rivers her own late-night show with full creative control. She deliberated for months, planning to call Carson before going public. Meanwhile, Fox and NBC footed a press war. In June 1986, Rivers learned Carson had found out via NBC's 6 p.m. broadcast, not directly from her. Hurt, he hung up on her voicemail. "I don't want to talk to her." She was effectively blacklisted. Carson didn't speak to her again, not a word. Even when Jay Leno offered her a slot at NBC later, he respected Carson's silence. Rivers' show faltered without network support. Many blamed Fox's inexperience, but in the late-night ecosystem, rivalries run deep. When Rivers died in 2014, Jimmy Fallon invited her back, ending a near 3-decade silence. Crew members said the taping felt like a ghost had been released, but the wound lingered. That was the clearest example of Carson's loyalty outweighing charm. It wasn't about comedy, it was about betrayal. For Carson, loyalty was everything. Putting these final 4 guests side by side, we see a man consistently professional, always adjusting. He never let personal feelings dominate, yet the cracks remained visible. Grimacing, pauses, internal negotiations. Whether facing long-winded dialogue, sudden confrontation, overt ambition, or shrewd self-interest, Carson absorbed the shock, recalibrated, and carried on. What unites the stories is this. Each guest revealed a different facet of Carson's craft. Hope showed how he responded to structure over spontaneity. Heston showed his skill in pacing volatility. Newton showed the power of a single line and the necessity of boundaries. Rivers taught him about personal loyalty and professional betrayal. Despite the friction, Carson never lost his footing. He remained the host, the conductor, the man in charge of tone and timing. He knew that television is theatre, but also human connection. And when an element threatened that balance, be it scripted precision or editorial exile, he adapted with calm professionalism. The Tonight Show became more than just a comedy platform. It became a crucible for negotiation between control and celebrity, between loyalty and ambition, between laugh and legacy. Carson carried that weight every night, often unseen, always felt. Though as viewers, we were entertained. Behind the scenes, though, a master was busy preserving a legacy, one delicate performance at a time. On stage, he smiled. Off stage, he strategized. That tension, that invisible burden, was the secret behind his composure and the true cost of hosting America's late night. What's your view? Did Carson stay too harsh on Rivers? Did he handle Newton well, or should he have poked back? And what about Hope or Heston? Were they too different for the Tonight Show template? Let me know.